Welcome to Accelerated Engineering. My name is John. Today I'm going to answer the question from Quora, what is data validation in Excel and how does it work? This was a question that was requested specifically for me to answer, and I love to do that. Thank you for requesting this question. I'm going to do my best to answer it thoroughly and completely and give a couple of examples. So data validation in Excel can be found in the Data tab of the ribbon. Usually you're at the Home tab. Move over to the Data tab. Right over here on my toolbar. It's got this nice little symbol. And what data validation does is it limits the values that a cell can contain. And there are a number of rules and a variety of ways that it can be limited. But we'll look at a couple of those. So if I click on data validation, it will allow me to set a rule for this cell. The last one that I used was to limit a cell to a whole number, so that's what it selects. And the default option typically in Excel is that any value may be permitted in a cell. The other options are for whole number or an integer, a decimal number, a list, which is very useful if I need to make drop-down menus or some sort of selection from a finite list of elements. It can limit to date. It can be limited to a time. It can be limited to a text length, like a certain number of characters that may be permitted inside of a cell. And then there are some custom rules. And we'll look at some of those later. But let's start with a nice easy one. We'll go whole number. And we'll say that because there's more options, we're going to say that this must be a whole number between the values of -5 and +5. And I'll just tell it to ignore. We'll hit OK. Now in the cell D3 specifically, I can enter 5 or 1 or 2 or -4 or -5. But if I try to put in -6, this is outside of the bounds of my cell rules. The value doesn't match the data value validation restrictions defined for this cell. Likewise, cancel. If I put text in here, nope, I'm not allowed to do that. Let's try again using a decimal number. Let's say 1.5. Well, that isn't a whole number. It's not an integer, so I'm not allowed to do that. I'm still limited to integer values between -5 and +5. Please pardon my birds. They like to talk when I talk. Okay. So back to the data validation. That's what we've got it set as for now. Now we have some additional options for this cell. We'll look at some more complicated allowances later. But once we've got a rule set up, then we can also add input messages and error alerts. For an input message, it just says, well, when the cell is selected, show this input message. And we can turn this off, we can turn it on, we can do whatever we want. We're going to say the title is between -5 and 5. The input message is going to be, you must enter a number greater than -5 and less +5. And we'll just hit OK on that. See what it does. There we go. As soon as it's selected, you can see I get the title in bold and the rest of my text in just ordinary text. That's really useful if you have a complicated rule or a non-obvious restriction on a cell. For example, if we had a cell that required a password input or, let's say, some sort of name validation with a text limit, it'd be very useful to say that just declare the limit to your user and say that it must be this many characters, or must be a value between this number and that number, or must be a value of this date format, or something like that. The other way that we can bound this is looking at the error alert. This is an additional user interface. We can either show no error alert, which kind of defeats the purpose of doing data validation. But the three options for an error alert is stop, warning, and information. And we've already seen stop a couple of times. It actually brings up an error message and says, you may not use that value in this cell, and it will disallow errant values. Warning is a little bit softer. Let's add a warning title and say, warning, value not in bounds. And we'll see what that does. So if I put a value that's out of bounds in this cell, 6, Excel pops up with a warning. It says, my text, warning, value not in bounds. Continue, yes, no, cancel, help. If I select no, then I get returned to the cell and I have to try again with a correct value. But if I select yes, it will allow me to keep the value in the cell, but I've been warned now. The information is similar, except it doesn't automatically kick me back. I can say information, info title. I'm just going to change this to info, value not in bounds, hit OK. Now if my value is outside of bounds, it says, hey, this is information informing me that your value is not in bounds. And I can hit OK or cancel or help. If I hit cancel, then it returns me back to the previous value. If I hit OK, and just accept that this value is out of bounds, then it's fine. It will keep that value. And that's kind of how data validation works. I'm going to take a moment now to look at some of these other settings for a variety of things that can be allowed. And before I jump into those, this would be an excellent time to like this video. And if you want to see more content like this, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Okay, let's look at some other options. Very popular is list. So I'll make a list actually. So let's say somewhere else we've created a list of values, and because I have a table of I won't reuse any cells. Input value, some other info. We'd make this into a table. I think I'll do this. Table has headers. Okay. Now our input value is limited. We only want a few things to be in here. And if you haven't seen a table before, just these titles allow some filtering and other stuff not to be worried about. Let's select these values and say we want to limit our input values to only be this set of 4 values here. I can take my data and data validation and only allow a list. And I think, oops, I must enter a source before I can make any changes. I would like my source for this list to be this set of values here. I'll hit enter. And then I would like to change my error alert so that it's just a warning. And we'll say, warning, select values A through D. And that'll be fine. I won't set up an input message for this one. We'll just leave it like this for now. Okay. Now we can see, oh look, when I select this cell, a little arrow comes up. And this actually gives me a drop-down menu. Using list in data validation provides a drop-down menu with the values that I've got set up here. So I can select C. If I try to enter something that isn't my input value and hit enter, then I get the warning. So select values A through D. But continue? Yes, I can keep that if I want to. The drop-down menu still comes up and gives a set of values that are acceptable. What else can we do with this in data validation? Let's see. Instead of doing a list, oops, I have to make sure that I select both of these cells. Actually, I don't. That's not true. Because I can apply these changes to all other cells with the same setting, and Excel will automatically get all of the cells for me. Let's say that instead I want to change it to custom. Do that with text. Yeah, I'll just show how it's done because it allows me to put in a formula. And what I'm going to do for this formula is just say if F3, so a self-reference because I've got the top cell selected. If F3 equals A, true, otherwise false, which is kind of a dumb formula, but this is just an example. This should have set it so that it only allows the value A, and you can see that there's an error. It says that C doesn't make sense, B doesn't make sense, but A is acceptable. A is the only value that's allowed inside of this cell without throwing a warning. So it's just an interesting way to do it. The way that this becomes very, very interesting and very, very complicated is that this formula can be a more complicated filter set. So for example, if I take this, and this is going to be the most advanced one that I look at for now, say 4 rows, 1 column, start at 0 and step by 1, and I actually generate this this sequence. It could be anything. This could be a list of values. It could be a set of unique values pulled from another table. It doesn't matter. But what I can do now is take my data validation and pull out a formula and say equals, sorry, not in custom. What am I doing? Data validation, apply all, and make this a list, and say that my source is actually equal to the filter of this whole range. And I've got a lock, and I've got my hashtag, and then I would have input my filter and have some filter criteria set up, which I'm not going to do inside of this. Obviously, the way that I would do this is I would say equals is even. I would write my filter formula here, equals filter this array, and then say include let's say include if whatever in this range is equal to the value B, which is, again, it's kind of a silly limit, but that's what it is. So it only allows the value 1 because that's my filter for B. And I could say, what if it equals C? Or let's do it this way, actually. I'll put this in parentheses, and this is not a great way to set up a filter function, but we'll say A3 to A6 equals B. And you can set up any conditions that you want. What this will do is it filters my list to only the value associated with B and the value associated with A. And what this allows me to do now is I can take my filtered list from somewhere else and apply that rule or that list into, sorry, pardon me, I can use the source here of whatever this value is, all the values associated with it. Okay. And now my limit values are 1 and 2. And what keeps that interesting is now it's dynamic, because if I change this value to B, well, my filtered list automatically updated, and so does my drop-down menu. It now allows more values. And this can be a really fun way to create some very complicated behavior. Any which way, I think that concludes, or this answers the questions and concludes the video. Thank you for watching. I hope that your day is going great and that all of your problems are this easy to solve. Thank you for watching, and may all your engineering be accelerated.